While there is a world trend on the inclusion of persons with disability in this complex society, the rights of a disabled person in developing countries, particularly in India, are almost non existent, where the rights of a girl or a woman are also vulnerable. Women and girls with disability thus face twice the discrimination. Shanta Memorial Rehabilitation Center, a credible disabled persons organization (DPO) based in Orissa, India, along with Development Research Institute presents e-courses to increase knowledge on gender issues focusing on gender-based violence against women with disabilities, living independently and inclusion in the society from a human rights perspective. This web based course is titled Insidious Violence and Women with Disabilities. This academic endeavor was designed keeping in mind the COVID 19 restrictions and the shift of focus from classroom lectures to a virtual learning environment.
So we have today, from today till the end of this course on the second, uh, a number of persons who have been lined up, who are experts in their subject. They are from India and from other countries. Like Kathy is from Australia. There are people from the United States, from um, also from Belgium, England. There is also this morning, Sovalik, who's supposed to join us, is having some problem in connectivity. The course covers a large number of issues, ranging from, though it says violence, but how to do research, how to go about it in activism. So all those subjects are covered. I leave that to Nandini to talk about it. But I would like to introduce Nandini, whom, when I asked her for a CV, she said she had known me for so long, she didn't think that I needed a CV. But even then, um, uh, Nandini works at the uh, Indian Development Studies at Kolkata, which is one of the leading research institutes in India. She is a professor of sociology there. We have done a lot of work together. She is a prolific writer. We have sent you some resource list which mentions all the books that she has written in the last few years. They have been included there. And also, she has she understands the issues of disability because she has lived through that. That is one of the things that many people with disabilities who will be speaking, who will bring to us their experiences, their not experiences in the sense of only social commitments, but also in terms of research or in terms of disability studies that we are looking at today. So, as part of the disability studies circle that we have globally and in India, Nandini fits in very, very well there. And she has contributed not only to the studies and journals that I had talked about, but also to the networks that are there. The Women with Disability India Network, which is also jointly working with us today, is also she is also a member. Today, we also have the Development Research Institute supporting this uh, event or for the next few days. And also, I would like to mention here that USAID has been a supporter, has supported this program, and that we are doing this in English now, but we will be doing a number of these talks in Hindi also that will follow. Nandan, thank you so much for joining us. both Kathy and Nandini. Nandini, please.
The speaker of this web course is academician activist Nandini Ghosh from India, speaking on disabled women, stigma and discrimination within the community.
Thank you, Ashadi. Um, uh, this course was actually planned to talk about violence against women, but it was also to highlight the issues that we are facing in terms of including women with disabilities in the community. So it is we have tried to put together a healthy mix of academic and activist people so that you have a exposure to what are the issues at the ground level, but also ways in which we can generate data, we can research the issues and lives of women with disabilities and bring the bring evidence to the people who are making the decisions at various levels. It does not have to be the central level. It also can be at very local levels where we can influence decision makers with evidence. And that is what is lacking because usually what we have is anecdotal data rather than evidence. So I would like to briefly introduce Casey, who's with us, and she will be doing the session tomorrow on researching disability. So basically, as you have seen the program, we have an entire range of sessions planned for you, uh, doing how to research issues on of women with disabilities, looking at disabled women and institutionalization and how it affects them, women with disabilities and their right to live independently and within the community. These are also issues which are very much important in terms of women with disabilities and especially in terms of the right to a family and right to live independently outside the family because there is this entire debate that goes on. Then, of course, gender based violence and mechanisms to address policy and practice and doing research, further research. So, this is the entire range of topics, and you would have received um, uh, the course outline also. So, we'll be doing these sessions from today onward. Uh, Very warm welcome to you, Kathy, and I will try to join your session tomorrow. Okay, yeah. Good morning to all the participants. Happy to see so many people signing up for this course because uh, usually these are courses which are always in the sidelines themselves. So, very warm good morning to everybody, and we will be starting the first session today, which is, of course, my session. As Ashadi said, why we planned this course, and before I go on to talk about disabled women, stigma, and discrimination within the communities, the whole point that I would like to highlight now and throughout my presentation is the fact that we keep talking about violence and violence against women with disabilities. But the whole point of violence against women with disabilities is the fact that it is not very visible to us. Like you would see violence against other women being very visible to people in the community in terms of the physical violence or in terms of the sexual violence. But for disabled women, most of the violence is emotional violence and sexual violence. And this is not very evident in the communities, in the families that we see. Overtly, you will not see any person beating up the disabled woman or something like that. But there are very insidious forms of violence that happen with disabled women throughout their life from their childhood to their adulthood. And this is what we will be talking about. But before we go on to talk about women with disabilities per se, what we really need to step back, and I am doing this because I don't know the backgrounds of all the people here. So basically, how do you understand disability? And for people who have a slight exposure, we understand disability by an entire range of diverse meanings. the fact that it could be an individual problem, and that is how it has been defined by people in different ways. This individual problem is that means that the problem is with the individual, and therefore the individual has to adjust and cope with what is going on in their own life. And then there was a shift in the understanding, and these are basically the models of disability. And the shift is basically the ways in which physical and mental differences between people, the so-called disabled and the able-bodied people, and how this disadvantages these people who have a difference. And the entire project, along with this, the medical model is to make disabled people to fit in with into mainstream society. Now, after this medicalized understanding of disability, a lot of disability activists came forward, and then they said that we need to move towards a social understanding of disability, and how society is the main culprit that creates a lot of disabilities by ensuring that the arrangements of society, the built environment, the ways in which education is structured, the way in which employment is organized, how all this basically leads to disabling certain people who have impairment. So impairments is the bodily lacuna, and disability is the social arrangements that prevent people with certain physical or mental issues to participate in society. Now, these people therefore pointed out that disability is constructed through a range of discourses. What are these discourses? There is a socio-cultural discourse, there is a legal discourse, the medical, political, and literary discourses. So, all these discourses, all these ideologies that create the disabled person as against the non-disabled person. And what does it do basically? It reflects the social anxieties about control, about bodily control, about control of power, and it also decides how identities are structured in society. Society creates a negative social identity for disabled people, and this is basically the language of abnormality, deviance, and this is what gives them a stigma. The being deviant or being abnormal is what provides a stigma to disabled people. Now, what does this reflect? It reflects that power relationships exist in society. And this means that power relationships decide who will be stigmatized, who will be marginalized within communities. And this is how some people will decide that these are people with disabilities and therefore to be marginalized. And this mainly raises what is a normal person. It raises questions of normality, and it raises question of who is able to define, bringing the question of power back in. This is what you need to realize, that there is an entire power game here that is being played based on who decides and what is decided as normal. Because if you decide that I am normal, then there are a lot of people who may not be normal also. Now we move towards looking at what have been the feminist interventions, and basically feminists have tried to point out how gender and disability are simultaneously disabling for disabled men and women, and this is because men and women are situated within particular socio-political environments, and they experience social expectations. This leads to particular experiences of the social fabric for them also. A lot of disabled feminists have used this double jeopardy, triple jeopardy model, which says that disabled women experience stigma because they are female in a patriarchal society, they are disabled in an ableist society, and also because they are disabled women. So the double is being patriarchal, being in a patriarchal ableist society and being discriminated, and the triple one is because they are disabled women also, and the entire poverty equation comes in. And if you look at India, the entire class, caste equations come in into the picture. But basically, what we are looking at is a deeper understanding of cultural representations of disability and gender. We are looking at how social processes and institutions reproduce gender and disability. Social processes like everyday life, institutions like families, schools, colleges, even our employment institutions, how they reproduce gender and disability in everyday socio-cultural practices. And this really has an implication for the experiences of disabled women. Now, how do you look at the indicators and indicators of the status for disabled women? Now, these indicators basically can be very subjective indicators. But before I go to the subjective indicators, I would like to take you through some of the objective indicators that are clearly talked about. Now, objective indicators clearly education and employment. Very clearly, we can see how education and employment in case of disabled women is affected, and this leads to their marginalization and discrimination within society. What happens really is disabled women receive less education than non-disabled women and men with disabilities. And this is very clear across the globe and very clear in the trends that we see in India in terms of the census data or even the latest NSSO data set of 2018, if you like to look at that. And the rehabilitation programs, the vocational training programs are usually monopolized by disabled men. If you look at any of the national institutes in India and you look at their usage data, you will find that far more men have benefited from the rehabilitation programs than disabled women. So what really happens? Why don't women come? Because if you look at the disability statistics overall, men and women are more or less, say, from a 60, it's a 60-40 ratio, but why are they not coming to the rehab programs or the vocational programs, training programs in a similar percentage? Disabled women have less access to the benefits to be gained from governments and other organizations. This is also very clearly true because even if you go to any state level data set and look at, say, the number of disability scholarships being given and how many boys and how many girls are receiving it. Look at disability pension, and you will see there is a very clear divide between women's access to these kind of schemes that benefit them. So what is happening here? Basically, it is again, as I said, the socio-political, the legal discourses that influence the ways in which these kind of support is given out to disabled men and women. Because there is a cultural attitude that men are breadwinners and women are homemakers. So if men have to work, they have to be rehabilitated, they have to receive vocational training and then move into some kind of employment. And it is easier for disabled men than it is for disabled women to counter this kind of a narrative. So women, because they are women, are supposed to be homemakers, and therefore this influences the way in which education, vocational training, and employment pattern for women with disabilities is structured. There's a very clear-cut divide here. Now, how do we understand social attitudes towards disabled women? To understand how do we understand the social? We understand the social through the communities and through the families. We understand it through the families and the communities. And if you look at the socio-cultural and religious constructions, you will almost always see that there are negative construction of women with disabilities, of disability per se, but of women with disabilities within these kind of discourses. You look at religious constructions, you look at socio-cultural constructions, and all of them talk about disabled women in a very negative manner. Women are dependent, they are passive, and therefore there has to be complete control over their reproductive and productive capacity. So this is how women are represented within the cultural framework in India, right? The religious framework is similarly representing women as passive, as people who must be controlled, and people who must therefore submit to the patriarchal control. Disabled people similarly are incapable, weak, passive, needing support. So, if you look at disabled women in both their identifications as disabled, as women, in both their identifications, they are passive, weak, dependent, and needing a lot of support. This means that disabled women are seen as worthless people in society. Their productive worth is zero and their reproductive worth is doubted. And I will be talking about this more. So disabled as dependent and woman with as dependent, it becomes convergent in a disabled woman's life in very specific way. The patriarchal and ableist ideologies work in very different ways to deny access to sanctioned roles. So women have certain sanctioned roles in society. They are born as daughters, they are reared as future wives and mothers, and then they move on to take their position as the bahu of some house and the mother of children. And this is the sanctioned role of women in society. So disabled women are denied by patriarchy and ableist ideologies the access to these kind of sanctioned roles. When you don't have access to sanctioned roles, you also lose in status. And therefore, you are denied full participation within families and communities. What really happens here is that she is considered to be a failure, right? Disabled women are considered to be failures. Why? Because she does not fulfill the norms of beauty. She's not, she's not of a certain physical ability to be considered as beautiful as whole, and she does not adhere to the gendered notions about women's place and role in family and community. So, a woman's role is to take care of the family, to take care of the elderly, to take care of the children, to do the household work, etc. And she is not seen or perceived to be capable of doing this. Disability is also linked with asexuality very clearly. For women with disabilities, this means that their marriage and their reproductive prospects are very seriously affected because they are considered to be asexual. For men with disabilities, it is not very similar to this. Men with disabilities are considered to be men per se. So their sexuality is not much in doubt. Whereas for disabled women, sexuality is something that is very much doubted. So that means their marriage and their reproductive prospects are not taken seriously. Therefore, they are denied the traditional roles of homemakers and mothers, and they face what is called, it's a sociological concept of rolelessness. Sociology says that every person has a role in society, the functional school of sociology. So the women with disabilities therefore do not have any kind of role assigned to them within their society, within their communities where they are living. Now, absence of these kind of socially sanctioned roles and the institutional means to achieve them means that disabled women are denied or completely denied any kind of social status within their own community. And this becomes really problematic for a lot of disabled women. Now, what happens here? And we know some of it, that disabled daughters within families, as soon as a disabled daughter is born, there is a sense of mourning that happens in the family. One, it is a daughter, and second, she is disabled, right? And Anita Ghai has pointed out this, many of her writings, and there are other disability scholars who have also talked about how Asian societies have found that disabled daughter is probably the least wanted member of any family. So there is a lot of sadness, there's a lot of, having a daughter itself is a sad event for family because then they have to start planning for her dowry for marriage. But here is a disabled daughter who is not likely to get married also, and that becomes a major problem. What is the result of this is the fact that disabled daughters are hidden within the homes. They are not allowed to go outside the homes in many cases. They are restricted in their movement. And often, even I have seen that in times of marriage of, say, the other sisters or the brother in the family, the presence of the disabled member is often hidden from the prospective in-laws of these brothers and sisters. And there is a lot of neglect. And how does this neglect work out? It works out in terms of general health. Disabled girls, if they fall ill, they are hardly ever taken to a medical practitioner. They are mostly treated with home remedies or let to be there, because the death of a disabled daughter would not be such a tragedy as the disabled of any other person in the family. So general health is neglected. Reproductive health, because of the denial of their sexuality, reproductive health is itself neglected. And how does this happen? And we see a lot of times that disabled women experience a late onset of menstruation. Disabled women experience very poor flow during menstruation. And these are problems that need to be flagged at the outset. If this was a non-disabled daughter whose reproductive capacities are being called into question, then the family would immediately take some action to ensure that this doesn't happen, because the person they will hand over to another family as a bahu has to have both the productive and the reproductive capacity. However, because the disabled girl is not to be handed over, number one. Second is the fact that a disabled girl might be needing a lot of care, physical care herself. So the more her menstrual cycle is delayed, the less her menstrual cycle, the less the care work that is invested, required to be invested in her. Therefore, there is a general neglect of the reproductive health of the disabled girls also. There is a lot of neglect in terms of education, and this is primarily because what is the need for education? In a lot of communities, a girl's worth increases if she has a certain optimal level of education, right? Now, this optimum level of education would ensure that she can contract a good marriage. Now, for disabled girls where marriage is not a possibility, what is the point of education? Attached to all this is also the fact that uh, the schools get further and further as they move higher into the education system. So we see a huge dropout happening after primary school. A lot of disabled girls drop out just because they cannot access the school which is further. There is also a lot of fear about the security of the disabled girl, how she can move towards, or whether she can live in a hostel, and whether she will be sexually abused there. And this is the fear that is cited by parents to pull the disabled girls out of school. The third point is about earning a living. Now, here is the most crucial point, and I want to say this very clearly. Disabled girls, women per se, are seen as additional workers to the family. They are not seen as the main earner of the family, despite the fact that there are many families, women-headed families, single, economically independent completely. Now, for disabled women, it is even more so. How can she be a productive person? Because she needs so much of support. However, the more you look at disabled women and their realities, you will see that earning a living becomes an imperative for many of these disabled women, because they are poor, they come from very poor households which cannot afford to have a completely dependent person. So, other than women with most severe disabilities, you will find, especially in the rural areas, a lot of women engaged in different kinds of work. It could be household agricultural labor. It could also be other kinds of small small scale industries in which they are employed, and they are all earning something to feed into the poor families that they live in. But there is also lack of opportunities, and therefore they experience very poor pay conditions, and they also are the people who are thrown out of jobs at the first possible opportunity. And of course, there are the very poor work conditions that they experience, because despite the fact that we keep talking about reasonable accommodation and proper working conditions, for disabled women, there is very poor structuring of the work condition. And there is complete absence of community care or community support mechanisms. There are hardly any kind of support mechanisms for women with disabilities, for families of women with disabilities, and there are absolutely no community care mechanisms available for women with disabilities. So this is what really leads to a slide in the status of women with disabilities, and this also creates a lot of discrimination within families, within communities for disabled women, and they are therefore quite marginalized in different ways. The other point that I wanted to highlight here, and we'll be talking about a lot in the next few days, is the fact about sexuality and abuse. And this happens concomitantly within both families and in the community itself. And insidious, the whole thing that we were talking about is the fact that this is where it comes in more forcefully. The socio-cultural traditions, they equate disability with desexing, and I've already talked about it. Families, they continue to negate the sexuality of these disabled women, but they leave disabled women open to abuse. And a lot of women, a lot of mothers of disabled women have told us that, I protect my other daughters who are vulnerable to abuse. But who's going to touch my disabled daughter? Who's going to abuse my disabled daughter? But this is precisely the kind of ideology that makes the disabled girl more vulnerable to sexual abuse, more vulnerable to being abused by men, and often she might not be in a position to reveal the abuse that is being done to her, and she may also be afraid to reveal it because she will be doubted by the family and the community. And there are these huge number of cases of sexual abuse that is being put under the carpet and not highlighted at all by families and communities. Communities further abuse disabled women through negation. So everything she wants to do, oh, how can you do it? Oh, you cannot do this. It is not possible for a disabled girl. So if you grow up continuously hearing that you are incapable, you cannot do certain things, there's a point in time where you start believing the same thing, and this also leads to further sexual exploitation of a lot of disabled girls. Disabled women have spoken about how they have been lured into sexual exploitation by community members just because they did not understand that this is what was being asked for. And this is also because of lack of access to information, lack of access to knowledge about what constitutes abuse, what is sexual abuse, how happens in community. There is also, on the other hand, there is a complete control of sexuality of women with disabilities by communities and at the state level. This control of sexuality is on one hand by not providing reproductive health information and services. There is a control by restraining them from marriage. There is control by forcibly asking them to take contraceptives and to practice sexual to be sexually controlled. And there is, on the other hand, state level institutions that promote hysterectomy. And you know about these cases that have been there, mostly in Pune, Wardha, Maharashtra. There have been a lot of cases, but there also across the country, cases that we have come to know, where state-run institutions are promoting hysterectomies of girls with intellectual impairments, of women with psychosocial disabilities who are in their care and protection. What it really does, the hysterectomies, is that it takes away the ability to bear a child, but it does not take away the sexual abuse. Actually, it makes them more vulnerable to sexual abuse because now men are emboldened because there will be no fallout of the actions that they take on. And the abuse within institutions, and there are various studies that document this. If you look at the Human Rights Watch report of 2015, I think there is this entire range of institutions that they have explored, where they have found how women have been physically abused, economically abused, and sexually abused within the institutions by the people who are supposed to be providing protection to these women. And to these, I add the cases of women who live in women with intellectual impairments who also live in institutions, and they are continuously subjected to different kinds of sexual and other kinds of abuse. To this, I also add women with severe disabilities within communities where there is a lot of rampant sexual abuse that is happening, and no one is really taking note of this kind of abuse, or there is a lot of payoff by people who are abusing these women to the poor woman's family. And this is very significant, where a woman's abuse can be bought off by a very paltry sum of money. If you look at the abuse that women, disabled women face, uh, of course, the entire gamut that I have been talking about, the physical violence, which is actually it may not actually be beating the woman, but it would be denial of mobility aids, it could be denial of food, it could be denial of proper sanitation facilities. This would be all under physical as well as emotional. Economic violence is when you are denied the money to buy your medicines, when you are denied essential commodities, like even sanitary napkins that you require. Social and emotional violence, and this is the most insidious form of violence, which is not seen. From childhood, if you keep hearing you are worthless, you cannot do anything, what can you do? What is to happen of you? Who will take care of you? This is the kind of social abuse that is given to disabled women within communities, within families. And this has a great emotional toll on these women, and of course, sexual abuse that I have talked about. And this happens within families and in domestic spaces. It happens at the level of the natal family very clearly, because most disabled women do not get married. So there's an entire gamut of violence that they face within the natal family. I've been talking about this, refusing food, neglecting to clean the person, neglecting proper sanitation, proper menstrual facilities, to the entire fact that you are abused and sexually abused within families and domestic spaces. There is also the fact that property becomes a major issue here, because, and that is a form of economic violence, because as we know by law, both boys, daughters and sons can inherit the father's property, but in a patriarchal setup, disabled women are almost always denied their share of paternal property. And this is another very serious abuse that happens within the natal family. For women who get married, in the marital family, there is a lot of other kinds of abuse. We all know that the bahu is always abused in the family, but if it is a disabled bahu, the abuse becomes 10 times more, because she is castigated at every point of time for not being able to do her share of the work, not doing it properly, not being able to keep the husband happy, not being able to keep the in-laws happy, not being able to take care of the children. Now, what this really does is it also eats away at the self-esteem of the woman with disabilities. On top of it, she is also subjected to physical and sexual violence. And I remember this clearly when during my research, I was asking a woman with disability who was married, and I said that, can you ever say no to sexual relations with your husband? And this was a working woman. She was having a proper earning, and she said, no. How can I say no to him? Will he ever listen? So this is the kind of sexual subjugation that disabled women face in marriage, and the fear that the man will leave her for another woman. And this is also something that happens very regularly, where men who marry these disabled women often desert them with their children and go on to new wives, and the woman is left behind to take care of herself, of her children, and sometimes return to the natal family where she is abused further for becoming now doubly dependent. Within communities, the abuse works in further ways. The first, of course, a lot of staring, verbal abuse, इसका क्या होगा, इसका तो कुछ नहीं हो सकता है. So this kind of verbal abuse and a lot of staring at these women, which really again eats away at their self-confidence, and sexual abuse, and I have already spoken about this a lot, which happens on an everyday basis for a lot of disabled women. So from touching, groping, molesting to rape is the entire range of sexual abuse that could be happening to disabled women within families and communities at any point of time. And economic abuse, again, I have spoken of this. And of course, the state level abuse that I have already talked about in the previous slide, where on one hand, the institutions perpetrate a lot of hysterectomies, etc., but also state policies that declare that it is okay to abort a disabled fetus, state policies that seek to control sexuality of disabled women in different ways. So this also becomes a different kind of abuse that disabled women face. So basically what we are trying to point out here is that disabled women are in a state of physical, social, and economic dependence. They are kept in that kind of a situation for a prolonged period of time from their childhood to their adulthood, and this dependence is created, fostered, nurtured, and ingrained within them to make them so to the extent that they themselves become insecure about their own capabilities. They experience abuse for longer periods of time. The abuse goes on in their lives from their early childhood to their old age, even in a certain way, when they are denied a lot of facilities that they need during because of their disability, because of their elderly age. They are likely to be abused by a greater number of perpetrators, and there are rural-urban differences in the ways that which it happens, but it is almost the same across the country, where a greater number of people, from family to people in the community, who could be abusing them in a number of ways at any point of time. However, such violations and the gross violations are even they go unnoticed and unreported, and the very insidious forms of violations are never reported anywhere. Families and disabled girls themselves do not have the courage to go and approach the police, to go and approach the courts of law, because this is where it becomes very, very problematic for them. They always are underplaying their own selves and their own capabilities. And what really happens here is, by this underplaying of their own capabilities, they are remaining in a position of extreme dependence. And I will try to stop now, and we will take some questions if required.